This is episode 1 of Insights as a Service. My name is Brendan Ritchie, and we've got a really strong first up episode for you with news from recent events within the industry. We've got a deep dive on the Digicel Pacific acquisition by Telstra with the help of the Australian government. And then we've got part 1 of a 2-part interview with Mike Jenkins, the CEO and founder of the Instillery.
We leveraged a lot of pre-existing data and insights that they had experienced globally. And then what we did is we summarised that essentially in a business case paper and brought that back to New Zealand.
All right, let's get started. This being our first episode, it's pretty easy for us to recap a solid chunk of news. That might get a little trickier if we have some quiet weeks leading up to Christmas, but I'm sure we will manage. So let's kick off with the news that Chorus and the local fibre companies in New Zealand are increasing UFB speeds. Maybe I'm just not a smart man, or maybe these changes are confusing as hell. I'd need a chart to be able to make the various speed changes all make sense, but the outcome is that speeds are being increased across the board. And it's not just Chorus, it's also enabled down in Christchurch and ultra-fast fibre, which is actually now called Tuatahi First Fibre, which I think translated into English means first fibre, which is kind of like saying ATM machine. But anyway, I could be wrong and I digress. So where was I? All of these companies have or soon will have moved their entry-level 100 meg symmetrical plans to between 300 and 500 meg symmetrical plans at the same price point. And this move is in response to pressure from 5G speeds, which Spark and Vodafone are preferring to sell due to the greater return on offer. Ultimately, the faster fiber speeds will help telcos deliver greater value for customers, and it evens the playing field for telcos that don't have access to 5G networks. And don't get me started on the state of MVNO agreements, but the way they have been implemented, the short version is that they are very, very painful. My only issue with what's happening with the fiber speeds is that Chorus is increasing the speeds but leaving the product names the same, meaning billing, ordering, and portal integration gets much, much messier. For example, the Evolve 100 product will actually be offering 300 megs. The Small Business Fibre 100 service will actually be offering 500 megs. So it kind of makes zero sense and is going to be just heaps of fun to work through. Moving to this side of the Tasman, and in a important and related point, I am actually based on the Gold Coast. NBN Co. has ramped up its focus on enterprise Ethernet. 44 new fiber zones have been created to drive uptake, meaning that around 60,000 businesses now get free install for NBN Enterprise Ethernet, or NBN EE, albeit that that free offer is on a 3-year term. So I've seen this in my day job where fairly remote locations are now getting the green light for free installs, which is definitely good news for all involved. Other measures in this NBN EE push include simplified zoning models and reduced install timelines. I saw that Aussie Broadband were reporting that it took them nearly 2 years to get 500 NBN EE services connected, but then sold another 1,000 in the next 8 months. So it would seem that the demand for this service is definitely picking up. For those not familiar with NBN Enterprise Ethernet, it provides symmetrical access up to 1 gig, can be purchased with varying degrees of committed bandwidth, and given it represents a great way for NBN Co to accelerate its return on investment, the focus on the service does seem to make sense. I just wish more customers saw value in it. It would make life a lot easier if we didn't have to work with flaky TC4 services, but the issue really is just the recurring price. It's often a tough pill for customers to swallow. On to hosted security application news. Zscaler has selected Orca as its Australian and NZ distributor. And Zscaler, full disclosure, I actually work closely with them in my day job. They are a big US company and we're looking for a way to better serve smaller, and I say that in inverted commas, customers, because I'm pretty sure they see smaller as less than 5,000 seats, which I think we all know is hardly small in the Australasian market. So long story short, they went with Orca, a company that looks to be batting way above its weight class. And in time, I will have to go and learn more about them. But congratulations to them. Wish them well with their push to drive Zscaler sales in the region. Kordia, the NZ government-owned telco, has now halved in size after ditching its Australian business unit Basically, it was no longer their core business. That side of the Tasman was involved more in the carrier level work, engineering, design, that sort of thing, and was not profitable enough to justify the focus it required. The NZ unit, with revenue around 120 million, they'll continue to focus on cybersecurity growth and the same enterprise and wholesale markets they've been operating in forever. On a side note, I think Kordia would have to have one of the best staff retention rates anywhere. It seems to be a lot of lifers there. But anyway, not related, just a thought. The following news is about 2 months old, but I thought it was a pretty big deal when Vocus New Zealand got DDoS'd on the 3rd of September. So it probably deserves a mention. I should probably also be calling Vocus NZ Orca NZ now, as I think they've had a name change in New Zealand, but old habits die hard. It seems as though the attack actually targeted an appliance aimed at protecting them from those exact attacks. So I'm not sure what happened exactly. I'm nowhere near technical enough to cover off on that, but I'm sure that the vulnerability has now been solved or blocked or whatever the right terminology is. When it happened, it took down a number of retail brands that operate under the Vocus umbrella. Perhaps as much as 13% of New Zealand's broadband services could have been impacted based on market share. So that would have been a pretty grim day at the office for a number of network engineers. And I've been there, at least on the sidelines of those sort of situations, and can definitely empathize. Telstra, they have released their T25 plan, they're calling it. And some key takeouts that struck me that I thought I would share are that they're going to bring sales and support teams for res and small business back to Australia by mid-2022. They're going to continue to pursue full ownership of Telstra branded licensee stores across Australia, which I'm sure is going to result in some small business owners hurting a bit. Although, to be fair, I'm not exactly sure of how those buybacks take shape. Ramping up focus on loyalty programs, so the focus on increasing share of wallet and stickiness of SMEs. They're going to, in the mobile space, aim for 100% of 4G coverage by 2024, while continuing to spend an absolute truckload on 5G, with an expectation that 80% of traffic will be carried over 5G by 2025. They are aiming to cut 500 million in costs, but from where is not immediately clear, so that will be interesting. There was an acknowledgement that the worst of the financial pain from the transition to NBN services is over, which definitely would have hurt the balance sheet over the last few years. And they want to become a place that people love to work, which, is like every other company out there at the moment. But ultimately, I think they need to get the fundamentals right. They, in the third quarter of 2021, Telstra's broadband internet was slower than that of Aussie Broadband, Optus, TPG Telecom, and subsidiary iiNet and Vodafone. So if you don't get your service right, it's hard to do all those other things. Moving back to NZ, AWS will set up a region in New Zealand. Looks to be 3 to 4 years away, but they do have big plans. Amazon's cloud computing unit will launch data centers in New Zealand in 2024 and create around about 1,000 jobs in the country over 15 years. Presumably that means between 2024 and 2040. After releasing an economic impact study, Amazon Web Services said it plans to invest 7.5 billion NZ dollars in its new infrastructure hub, which they're calling AWS Asia Pacific / Auckland region. The world will look very different in 3 years' time with open borders, fingers crossed at least. Otherwise, I think those jobs, those 1,000 new jobs, are going to be very hard to fill. I don't think you will find any part of our sector where at the moment it's not very difficult to find people for skilled roles. But anyway, look, this announcement is alongside a previous similar release from Microsoft, which will see them also bring compute onshore from some point in 2022. So I guess one thing that stands out to me with all of that is that it will be very interesting to see what impact all of this compute moving onshore has on trans-Tasman bandwidth demand, as many services currently are fed out of Sydney. And in future, they'll be bought onshore and served out of NZ. But that is it for news this week. Next time around, I am definitely keen to talk about the Vocus NZ or Orca NZ move with 2 degrees. Plenty of talk around a merger for those two. And I'm also keen to cover off on what has transpired between now and then between Over the Wire, which is in the sights of Aussie Broadband. So plenty of M&A activity in the market at present. All right, I want to talk about Telstra and the Australian government teaming up to purchase Digicel Pacific. This story, it got my attention because in it we have a telco that doesn't operate in Australia being bought by Telstra with government money at a time when Telstra has been working very hard to streamline operations. And all of that was done with the clear, or well, at least the purchase has been constructed under the clear understanding that is being done in the national interest based on fears of Chinese Communist Party control of private enterprise, and specifically one enterprise, Huawei. So news broke on the 25th of October that Telstra, with the help of the Australian government, was set to buy Digicel Pacific. So to me, this was new information, but I actually found in researching this piece that reports have been around, in various publications that this has been on the cards for at least a year. So being honest, I also know bugger all about Digicel Pacific. I get that it's a mobile player, and I'm pretty sure that I've seen it in games of rugby involving Fiji. It's often in banners in the background, but other than that, really knew nothing until a few days ago. Now, however, I know that it actually has a remarkable share across the Pacific. So PNG is by far Digicel Pacific's biggest market, where it enjoys 91% market share, which is incredible. But the company also holds a dominant market share in Samoa with 71%, Vanuatu 65%, Tonga 58%, and Nauru 52%. It turns out it's only in Fiji, where it holds 32%, that Digicel is the second ranked network, with Vodafone Fiji being the dominant player there. Now, I'm not a counterintelligence expert, believe it or not. I don't even know if I've used that term correctly, but I have got out the red string, stuck some newspaper clippings to a corkboard, and have got to work on trying to make some sense out of all of this. And there are a number of questions and what ifs to explore here, so let's get stuck in. So how real is the threat? Well, the Australian government has been worried for some time about the risk presented by Huawei's involvement in telecommunications infrastructure inside and in the vicinity of Australia. And this concern has actually resulted in Huawei being banned from involvement in 5G builds. And also, there have been interjections in cable projects and now the funding of acquisitions. So given those actions, is it reasonable for us to assume that there is a credible threat to address? In 2018, the Solomon Islands government was pressured into excluding Huawei from Project Honiara, which was a planned undersea cable. And that was after an MOU was signed by the Solomons government, in which Huawei would have been given the job of providing some key hardware elements. So the Australian government at the time threatened to remove rights to land that cable in Sydney. And the Solomon Islands government backed out of its plans with Huawei, and Vocus was ultimately awarded the contract with the AU government, paying the vast majority of the cost, which was somewhere around $200 million. That same year, Huawei was banned from involvement in the NBN rollout and 5G builds, a move that really pissed off China, led to a dozen or so countries following suit, and drove divisions inside the federal government. Now, in terms of what was happening inside the government, in that period, Scott Morrison had actually backed Peter Dutton on the hard line he took against Huawei 5G involvement and the pressure he placed on then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Prime Ministers were coming and going at a rapid rate back then, but that was all done to ensure that the end result was a ban on Huawei. And given that Scott Morrison now runs the show, the acquisition of Digicel Pacific really does look to be on trend. The concerns around Huawei, and I'm certain I am pronouncing that wrong, are driven by the ability for the Chinese government to control the actions of its businesses and the critical part they play in 5G. And 5G, of course, will play a massive part in the delivery of critical infrastructure. So my first reaction is generally to think that espionage and spying exists in films only. I'm just so far removed from that world that it seems hard to believe it's even a thing. But when looking at the detail, you can see how there is a cause for concern. These snippets that I'm about to read were reported in the Sydney Morning Herald in an article entitled "Huawei, No Way, Why Australia Banned the World's Largest Telecoms Firm." And it was written by a guy called Peter Harcher. So he said, the Chinese Communist Party enacted the National Intelligence Law of 2017. This law unequivocally requires that any organization or citizen shall support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work. and aid the national intelligence agencies to, quote, carry out intelligence work at home and abroad, unquote. By the end of 2018, more than 90% of private businesses in China had established internal Chinese Communist Party cells to guide and monitor them and enforce the party's will, according to Beijing's official tally. And in 2020, Xi Jinping announced a policy that obligated private businesses to work with the party's United Front Work Department, which is an organization responsible for mobilizing Chinese populations abroad to serve Beijing's interests. Private companies are required to, quote, unswervingly listen to and follow the steps of the party, unquote. Now, to be fair, I think the Australian government has introduced some pretty incredible laws relating to surveillance that I should probably cover off in some future post. And if we read those in the same fashion, they would sound pretty damn ominous too. But looking at why 5G is such a flashpoint, we need to really look at how it will form part of our national infrastructure going forward. Telecommunications risks no longer relate to the interception of telephone calls. That's really old school thinking. 5G is about machines talking to machines in real time because of the tiny latency or the massively reduced latency that is on offer through 5G. And if that process is interrupted by the actions of a foreign power, we could have chaos. Sewage pumps would stop working, clean water wouldn't come to you, traffic lights fail, trains stop, electric cars that are self-driving wouldn't work. Imagine a company or foreign government having that sort of ace up their sleeve. Right, so there are the risk factors, right? So let's check out the structure of the deal for Digicel Pacific, that, the acquisition that those risk factors drove. As reported by the ABC, the $2.1 billion deal to acquire and run Digicel Pacific is being funded largely by the government, which will provide $1.9 billion towards the acquisition. Telstra said it would contribute $360 million and own 100% of the company's ordinary equity. But to be clear, this isn't a charitable donation by the government. They expect it to be repaid and hold subordinated equity in the interim, which basically, not that I'm an accountant, but I believe it means unsecured or less secured debt. The terms are obviously extremely favorable, though, almost as if the acquisition made so little sense in relation to Telstra's strategic priorities that the government just had no option but to make it too good to refuse. So the risk to the government is really just that the debt won't be repaid due to poor performance by Digicel Pacific, which is running with earnings of $300 million, but really isn't without its challenges. Digicel, according to the Financial Review's piece from July this year, says Digicel relies on Huawei tech to run its network. Telstra, however, uses Ericsson for its 5G rollout, and the Australian government has, of course, banned Huawei. So what gives? If the aim of all of this was to remove Chinese influence in the Pacific, does the network not need to be overhauled? In July, an IT Wire article stated, quote, if the Australian government is expecting Telstra to not only buy these Digicel assets, but also replace the gear they use with either Ericsson, brackets, which Telstra uses, close brackets, or Nokia equipment, then the cost would rise to multiples of the initial purchase figure of $2 billion, end quote. They added that, quote, as with all telecommunications gear, upgrading to 5G equipment would not be possible unless the 4G gear was first replaced, end quote. Now, look, I'm not anywhere near technical enough to fact check that, but would love to hear from anyone that is, because I think it's an important distinction. Telstra has been working hard to simplify its business by clearly defining and splitting out business units. So I think this has been potentially done in the aim of setting them up to sell off infrastructure-focused units. So this whole Digicel vibe seems to go against the grain from where I sit. And just to put one more boot in, operating in countries where graft is rampant and democracy often struggles just makes this all that much more difficult. And I get why this has been done. It's not the first such move, but man, it's going to make things way more awkward between Australia and China, or certainly no smoother between Australia and China. It's going to be really interesting to see what Telstra does from here in relation to network investment and, of course, the performance of Digicel Pacific. We'll keep an eye on it, and perhaps we'll do another piece in a future episode. All right, let's get into a conversation, part one of our conversation with Mike Jenkins, CEO and founder of the Instillery. Mike, hello. We are doing this podcast chat. All right, so you were saying you're in Tamaheri?
That's it, Brendan. Yep, here at home in the mighty Waikato in New Zealand.
Boom. All right. And as I said, I feel like crap. I feel like after a night out with you. So if I do cough, hack, sound like crap, that would be why. Well, no, that's not why. I haven't been out with you. See, my head's not working. I am just feeling awful, but it's reminiscent of how I felt after a night out with you, which was in the long ago because COVID. But anyway, look, I wanted to talk to you because I think anyone working in the tech space in New Zealand knows about the Instillery. What's, I think, less clear is where you came from before the Instillery came into view for most people, the lessons you learned along the way, what the catalysts were, retrospectively looking back, what you might do differently. I think there's a lot to unpick there that would be valuable for people to understand and perhaps learn from, regardless of the industry they're in. So maybe if we kick off the conversation, I was sort of trawling through your LinkedIn profile as you do on a Monday afternoon, and I realized you had a hell of a long time at two pretty big businesses, right? You're at IBM for 9 years, and you're at Cisco for 2.5.
Yeah. I think 3 or 4. I can't remember. I'm not very good on the old LinkedIn update.
No, fair play. So just at a basic level, give us a quick heads up on young Mike. What were your roles there? How did you sort of cut your teeth?
Yeah, well, I might even go back a little bit further, but I'll be painless, I promise.
Okay, thanks.
So I came up. My old man was an auditor, and he was in multiple businesses, and he actually ended up working for Baycorp and got asked to come in and shut down this little business called Computerland, which actually ended up being part of the Genome machine. And he actually fell in love with tech, and more so the amazing humans in tech, the big personalities, and the people that just made shit work is the short version. I probably should have checked if I could swear.
Mate, swear.
I'll probably do it again.
Go nuts.
So
yeah,
it's
fine.
And so my actual love or affiliation for the sector, the tech sector and digital in general, actually came from him, and he's always been a big role model for me.
What year are we talking there?
And so, well, man, we're talking like he was in the 80s, Computerland in the 80s, 88, 87, 88. So we had moved all over the show. I'd been to like 6 schools in 6 towns in 8 years. Because he basically got put on a project every 3 or 6 months, and so as a fams we just followed him around. So that's probably a large reason why I don't get afraid walking into too many rooms these days, and you can strike up a convo with the cleaner or the CEO. It doesn't really matter. I've sort of been dropped into a couple of gnarly situations. But yeah, so like I said, he was a role model for me, and that really what set off my love for the sector. But then, funnily enough, he even though he was in it for such a long time in Computerland and the epic organisation that was with some amazing people, he actually gave me some advice. He said, "Forget about this IT gambit. Property or finance are the only 2 smart career options for you. Don't do what I do, just do what I say." And so I landed back from the UK like most Kiwis, post an OE, a van trip around Europe, which absolutely love, still have fond memories of today. And I took up an apprenticeship basically at Computerland, having graduated as part of a co-op training program. And again, I probably, despite his advice, I did fall in love with the people, some amazing people and personalities. And I just love the problem-solving nature of the industry. And I think I realized then that tech would actually underpin every single industry. So if I wanted variation and a bit of spice of life, then digital was it for me. And I literally fell in love with it. So like you said, Brendan, I straight out of Computerland, there was a young man at the time, John Hanna. He was the sales director for Computerland.
Right.
And he took up this huge role at IBM. He said to me, "You should come. It's amazing. Big Blue. It's the resurgence, global superpower." And he was pretty compelling back then, as he is today.
Sure.
And so I interviewed for the role. I had 2 choices. I was very fortunate enough to get the role on $37,500 a year as a grad. One was working for IBM STG, which is a server storage group. And the other one was working for this absolute mob of an outfit, which was called Logical, which was an IBM acquisition. And again, some big personalities there, Dave Heald, Verdon Kelleher, Lindsay Swart, who's still banging around today in the industry. And again, I was fortunate enough to meet them. And basically, I just chose the humans that I really resonated with. These guys were the masters of network and security, biggest Cisco partner in New Zealand. And again, I just think I fell in love with the story and the humans. And once I got to meet the technical talent that sat underneath, it blew me away. So I jumped at the opportunity to start with IBM, and I had a really amazing career with them initially here in Aotearoa. And then again, got the shoulder tap from my boss at the time, Mel Mackay, who did the logical integration acquisition. He went back to Australia and he ran a big division there, and he shoulder tapped me to come in and do that. And then I had several sales and management roles over in Australia with IBM for a long period of time. Actually, before my wife got pregnant, and we pulled the eject button and came back home to be surrounded by the whānau, and we had no idea what we were doing with baby number one. And we want to be back with the grandparents and cousins, and again, not a single moment I regret that decision. It's amazing to be home.
Yeah, you need that support when you've got number one on the way. So, hey, I guess the thing that stands out there to me is, your journey's been based a lot around the people. Are you saying that finance and property people just aren't as compelling? Is that the key? The key message.
What I'm saying, Brendan, is, I think a lot of people turn down a lot of good advice, and it's okay. You got to run your own race, forge your own path, and I think that everything happens for a reason, man. And like I said, the decision to come back from the UK to land in Computerland, and I think any other decision, you never know, right? But it's worked out okay, and I'm really happy with where we're at.
Yeah, that's fine. You dug yourself out of that nicely. So with Computerland, I know very little about Computerland. Can you just give me a quick heads up on, I guess when Ross got involved, your dad, what sort of, whether it's turnover or staff numbers, whatever metric you want to use, where did that sort of get picked up at when it was in a bit of trouble, and where did it end up at prior to joining the Gen I or Spark stable?
Sure, yeah. So again, and my knowledge is a bit dusty because, to be honest, I was a 5 pretty much when this whole thing first kicked off. But I used to bike to Computerland every day after school and mix it up with the guys playing like 3D Doom simulators and training rooms and all that sort of stuff. So again, so you have to bear with me. But Computerland was essentially the very first challenger, right? Yeah, when like Novell CD-ROMs and floppy disks were flooding enterprises on big Sun servers. These were the guys, the systems integrator that got called to do the big projects, whether it was like Downer, Goff and Hammer, some real old school, farmers, Kiwi brands. They were the fixers basically that asked you to come do it. So you buy your stuff from them, they'd set it up for you, they'd train you how to use it, and then away you go. So they were in the hundreds of people up and down New Zealand. Big regional New Zealand presence as well, which is something that I really took in as core DNA to what I wanted to do with the Instillery. Get really close to our customers. Markets that have been really underserved for a long period of time, and these guys were the true champions, of tech in New Zealand for a long period of time up until the acquisition by Spark or by Telecom at the time, and they rebranded to Gen I. And again, I don't know much of the detail about that because the old man parachuted out just after he sold it. So, but look at the business that they are today up and down New Zealand, and there's some amazing people from that Computerland era that are leading a number of the Kiwi tech organisations today.
And arguably, by association, you're one of them. So I guess you got back to NZ. TIG was launched in 2013?
2013, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Independence Day.
So cool. So the journey, I guess, from getting back to NZ to launching that off, I guess I want to understand the triggers. Like, was it a personal trigger, like a desire to kind of have some independence, or was it a professional trigger where you felt you genuinely understood that you could uniquely solve a problem that others just weren't? Like, what was going in your head that made you feel that you had this? Yeah.
So after the IBM journey and coming back to New Zealand, I was really fortunate enough to land back with IBM. My leadership supported me to come do that and do a transition back home. And I was fortunate enough that another big mentor of mine, Jeff Laurie, saw the opportunity to grab me and asked me to come and look after service provider for him. And this was in the wave of 4G packet cores. And anybody that knows anything about telco and mobile generates a shitload of data. And so along with the data and telco requirements of networking and security, data storage was really critical. And so we had a number of New Zealand and actually Asia Pacific's and the world's largest telcos buying a lot of Cisco UCS servers and data storage technologies, where we were selling things like FlexPod with NetApp and VMware solutions and you name it, we were selling it as bundles with Cisco. And people stopped buying tin, Brendan. And when you're working for a company that manufactures a lot of it, that's a really tough time to go through. And so you know what, really crazy concept. I talked to Jeff and we started to see the numbers slide a little bit. And I went out and just started talking to these big businesses. And I wanted to understand why. what's changed? They've been spending 10 million euros with us every year for a period of time. What's changed? And the change that they all unanimously said was, hey, there's this thing called public cloud. People like Verizon and Telstra are getting on board with it. You need to take a red hot look at it and look at how it can benefit your business and ours. And so I was very fortunate at the time. Cisco was actually just completed an acquisition of Cisco Meraki, which is the very first, and I still think the market-leading cloud managed networking technology for switching, Wi-Fi, and security. There you go, to plug for the team at Cisco there.
I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
Yeah. But what we saw with that was a massive change in thinking around the traditional network model. You've got to send people to site. They've got to be a CCIE. You've got to set the whole thing up at $200 an hour. Could take a couple of days, couple of weeks. You're talking big investment. And Meraki essentially transformed the networking game by allowing you to send a device like in a pizza box with an instruction on your 20-second clip on YouTube that the local receptionist or fishmonger or retailer could plug into their existing connection, and away you go. The rest is remote. And so part of that, those two things, Brendan, were the key triggers for me. I was saying, okay, if Cisco Meraki can truly transform networking to cloud managed networking, and if we're seeing people stop buying tin and the prevalence, or what I sort of call this love tsunami of public cloud, was coming down to Asia Pacific, and bear in mind we're laggards a little bit in that degree, having no local DCs at the time. I was inquisitive. I had a hypothesis that I thought if I could grab a couple of smart kids, people that I trust, and some foundation customers, and demonstrate that actually hyperscale cloud is relevant to Kiwi organizations, both private and public, then we're onto something. And if we can't, then I got to go back and get a real job again. And so the Instillery was born.
Real quick, if you need a partner to build the connectivity foundation for your SD-WAN or to provide the SIP trunks for your team's calling with direct routing deployments, check out lightwirebusiness.com and get in touch. So on that, like I imagine you said you had a hypothesis. So I imagine, a term we use a lot is bullets then cannonballs, right? Test small, then go big if it lands. How did you make sure that you were able to test your hypothesis in a lean way? Like how did you kind of, string it all together without basically putting it all on the line? Or did you put it all on the line to test this hypothesis?
Yeah, good questions. And really it started off, I'm a big fan of data-driven decision-making. So first and foremost, but I'm a little bit old school too, in terms of old soul, in terms of you got to go with your gut feel sometimes and trust. You got to believe in the process. So firstly, I was really fortunate and Angie let me, and I say let me very loosely, go on a 3-month trip to the US with my co-founder, Andy Cronin at the time, who I started the business with. So shout out to Andy for his support. So both our partners let us go, and we went away for 3 months. We went West Coast, East Coast. We went to every single public cloud conference you could. Cloud Slam, Cloud Jam, Cloud Con, you name it, we did it. Through those conferences, classic Kiwis were a little bit cheeky. We got into places you probably wouldn't ordinarily get into. We leveraged our own organizations to get higher up and meet with some of the big bosses of Amazon, Microsoft Azure, and even GCP, and who are really leading the charge on the public cloud arena. And so what we actually did was we leveraged a lot of pre-existing data and insights from that they had experienced globally. And then what we did is we summarized that essentially in a business case paper and brought that back to New Zealand and sort of, I would say, circled it around with a couple of friendlies. So friendly leaders, friendly CIOs, friendly CFOs, because what we learned globally was actually this IT decision-making process for cloud was no longer in the hands of IT. This was CEOs and CFOs understanding that the business case had changed and that the same way of doing it that they'd done it for 20 years was not going to, suffice for the growth in data, the explosion of data that they were planning on in the next 10. And so that's what we did. We came back very fortunate. We tested it with other local SaaS companies, the likes of Xero and Vend and Unleashed, who were all leaders in the public cloud space in New Zealand. Mercury was an amazing client of the Instillery early on, and Grant Beatty now leads our consulting business here in New Zealand, and he was instrumental in that, literally physically moving them off on-premise to public cloud, and that really changed the game. Those key foundation customers and referenceability and local market groundswell were really the catalyst for us to go, let's go all in. And so that's what I did, Brendan. Andy and I came together. We sold my beach house. We sold some shares, and we literally went all in on the Instillery. And to be honest, again, I wouldn't have done anything differently.
So I guess I'm always interested in, is it like chicken and the egg, I guess. Did you, hire? I don't know how much hands-on skill you and Andy had. Like, I imagine with you, not much. Was Andy very, very skilled and hands-on?
Andy, and again, I can't give the guy a rap big enough. Andy is one of the smartest people I know, but he's also a bloody good human. His ability to learn, he was one of the first CCIE voices in New Zealand, way back when, and his ability to learn and change and adapt, but communicate in a way that was non-threatening. If you're telling somebody the way they've been doing something for 20 years, that can be quite a tough conversation. But again, he sort of diffused a lot of the situation by bringing intelligence to the fore and talking about real concepts and quite pragmatic. Again, the way that to be honest, haven't seen a whole lot of consultants do ever. So I felt that, him leading the consulting conversation was really important. And you're right, I was absolutely rubbish, but I was on a fast learning path myself. But again, in saying that, some of the very early customers, it was the 4 or 5 of us, with a couple of really high-powered grunt engineers working with us to actually move VMs and move storage in the early days, deploy cloud-managed networking in the early days. We're doing changes at 11 o'clock, over a pizza and a couple of bottled waters for some big customers, with them in the room as well, just to make sure we were good to go. And again, once we got that success and got that momentum and we started building our own patterns with repeatability, through things like automation, CI/CD, and DevOps, we really started to even, believe the hype ourselves, because we saw it, we could do it for ourselves. And that really fueled the belief, and not just us, but our customers. And again, probably back in 2013, it would have been a brave customer to say, I've gone all in with the Instillery, and most people will be like, is that a local brewery or what's the go? But I'm just so proud and fortunate that there's been so many business leaders over the years that were brave enough to choose something different. And that was really the whole mission behind what we're trying to do. We wanted to set out to disrupt what we believe was becoming a lazy tech sector here in New Zealand, and people were just doing the same thing they'd always done, and you buy it from one of 2 people, Datacom or someone Spark owned. And we wanted to create a genuine tier 1 choice. And I'm really proud to say that I think we have, and we continue to operate in that manner.
You absolutely have. So it sounds to me like, I guess the secret sauce was kind of 2 things, right? It was timing. I mean, it was insight, understanding the market shift, the dynamics, international access, and timing. And then second, the network, right? Being able to get in places where perhaps others couldn't, knowing the people to talk to kind of validate some of your ideas. But how did you identify your initial sales targets? Like, how did you choose, what was your go-to-market strategy? Day 1, 2 guys, an idea, huge investment, shit, this better work. How did you identify who you're going to go talk to first?
It was literally who has the most data storage. So again, we wanted to get 1 or 2 big customers in our first year. We got 1, and we were very fortunate. Again, that they believed us and allowed us to partner up with them. And for us, so having 1 customer for 15, 16 months was not the plan that we set out to have, Brendan. It's quite, you sort of get 1 and then you knock them over. But this one was big enough that actually was all consuming. And we had other opportunities to do other things through referrals from these foundation customers, but we just decided we wanted to go all in and deliver that experience that we promised, and deliver something special, special and unique, something that couldn't be copied. And that meant the evolution of a concept that we called Copilot, which was not necessarily doing it to a customer, whatever the technology was, but actually genuinely empowering, educating, and enabling them to understand the benefit all the way through their business, not just at the pointy front-end technical, right up to the CEO, and understand the why. And then once we invested up front and we enabled that business to understand the benefit of doing what we're doing, the digital transformation, we found that really smoothed the path for program after program after program. And we were always big, like I said at the beginning, on data-driven insights, so we would always measure at the start, what was it like, what was the performance, what was the cost, and we'd always measure at the end. And we made sure those findings elevated right up to the very top of that organization. So when the next business came around, it was a relatively smooth process. But like I said, it was really about the data-driven effort, and we just really wanted to lock in the very first foundation customers.
We'll leave our conversation there for this week, but we'll pick it up again in the next episode. If you've liked what we've thrown out in episode 1, please just let us know. Either leave us a review if your podcast platform lets you do that, or reach out either via LinkedIn. You can find me there, or by email at brendan@insightsasaservice.fm. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to catching you next time.